On your right, we have Adam Smith. Yeah, thank you very much. I think you might say he's playing at home. I think you might say he's playing at home this evening versus Ian Whittaker from the city, although confusingly Adam looks as though he works in the city at the moment. Anyway, so I am billing this as Adam Smith from Group M, Mighty Marauder. Okay, we're using these boxing terms here. Then on your left we have Ian Whittaker, equity analyst at Liberum for 20 years, arguing, is the agency model dead? I will say he is going to play devil's advocate here, okay? So if Adam is the mighty marauder from Group M, what is Ian? He is the city, and I was looking for a C word to go with that.
And I came up with it all.
We decided on one, make sure I pronounce this one right, the city crack shot, okay? We're being polite for now, all right? So this is the format. Ian, representing effectively the prosecution, is going to open with 5 minutes on explaining why he, devil's advocate, thinks that the agency model is dead. And then we're going to turn to Adam for 5 minutes to put the counter view. Prosecution, defence. Home, possibly tonight, away. Brave of you, Ian. And I noticed that neither of you is fueled by alcohol so far, which is a good thing. So, after that, I'm going to allow them to cross-examine each other, but I will moderate. And then we're going to throw it open to questions. And then in about 35 minutes' time, we'll wrap it up and we'll have the final vote as to see who wins. And then, over there, to the bar. Okay, so Ian, take it away.
Thank you. So in terms of the case for the prosecution, sort of against the agency groups, and sort of why things are turning more negative, I think if you look at sort of what the arguments would be, sort of what's been suggested, it all boils down to effectively saying that the agency model is obsolete sort of in the day and age. It was very much a product of the 80s all the way through to the early 2000s. In terms of what the agencies did, the big agency groups like WP and Publicis and so forth, if you look at what's happened now, things have changed. The internet has definitely changed sort of in terms of media, so that it's disrupted the traditional sort of media companies, TV, press, and so forth. When it was sort of just with traditional media, it was very easy for the agencies to operate. They knew exactly who their clients were. There were only a few clients, sort of a few platforms, sort of each particular space. Yeah, and it was a very profitable model for them. If you look at the agency groups, and you split them down, the main profit driver for the agency groups are their media buying and planning businesses. Yeah, if you take the rest of the agency models, if you take creative, for example, and what's happening there, sort of in producing ads, sort of over the past 15, 16 years, margins have been compressed. Advertisers actually see it as less valuable. Sort of their view is they're willing to pay less and less for those things. If you take other parts of the agency model as well, if you take, for example, PR, again, clients have actually, the advertisers have become less and less enamored of that product as well. Now, in terms of digital was seen as it was the great saviour 5-6 years ago of the agency groups. It was the whole idea was that digital was very complex, and because complex, advertisers would actually need to employ the services of the agencies, and therefore the agencies would become more valuable in that relationship. So the argument would go that actually, in a lot of ways, sort of things have gone the opposite way. You've got the likes of Google and Facebook, who are very keen to disintermediate the agencies and actually go to clients directly. You've got the management consultancy groups such as Accenture and Deloitte, who increasingly are building up their digital skills, and again have targeted on what the agencies do and think this is a nice area of business that we can get into. And arguably they have far more skills in digital than the agencies have. That is their core proposition after all. And then if you look at sort of what advertisers are saying at the moment, increasingly there is a backlash amongst advertisers in terms of digital. They're saying a lot of the money that we spend on digital, quite frankly, just doesn't get to the end product. It doesn't get seen by a real life human in a brand safe environment. And as you can see in the US last year with the ANA report, they are blaming the agencies for this and saying that the agencies either don't have the skills or have turned a blind eye to what has gone on with business. So increasingly what you're seeing sort of amongst the advertisers is dissatisfaction with the agency model. Now, can the agencies reinvent themselves? Well, of course, businesses do all the time. But even there, the argument would be is that the agencies, if you look at them, are sprawling of entities. Hundreds of companies within each group, often not talking to one another. Often sort of there's duplicate functions all over the place. You've got a situation where sort of in certain cases you've got very well remunerated people who the argument would go aren't sort of adding that much in the way of value. There was a strong case for saying that the agency groups will get sort of very, very quickly, sort of their lunch will be eaten by faster moving, smaller groups that will come through and competitors. In that sort of environment, sort of it's hard to see, the argument would go, how long the agency model could last. Maybe another 3 to 4 years, 10 years, 15 years out. So there's a very strong argument said that the agency groups actually, in their current format, sort of it'd be very hard for them to sustain their business. So sort of while advertisers, no one is saying that advertising is going away. No one is saying that in terms of some of the functions, the media buying functions, etc., won't be there. But for the agencies themselves, what is being said is that the agencies from their position, let's say 10, 15 years ago, where they were very much the middle person between the advertisers and the platforms, that role has been washed away.
Okay, Adam. So you're obsolete. Where's my mic? You're obsolete. You're disintermediated, and you might be banged up by the FBI, by the way, because we forgot to mention that. I don't know if you saw that story. The FBI is rumoured to be investigating agencies in the States. So, not much hope for you, really, is there? Make the case for the defence, please.
Well, starting with a couple of broad principles. The idea that there is some fixed model which is broken is it's just cognitively dissonant. I mean, the agency history, which goes back a lot further than the 1980s, is a 100-year history, and it's a history of market-led evolution and adaptation to circumstances. So to say the model is broken is a bit like saying capitalism is broken. It has no sense of morality or direction. It's about allocating resources. And in those 100-plus years, the agencies have time and again outlived their obituarists, while realizing that we have no divine right to immortality. But we read about our clients being plagued by activist investors. I think the last activist investor we had, unless you know better, and you might, was David Harrow back in 1985. So I would begin to worry about the model being seriously compromised if we were beset by activists like Harrow. So why do clients use agencies? The main reasons are cost, flexibility, specialization, and that's for a range of reasons. They might be buying fame or reputation, reinforcing something, growing their business, or trying just to a call to action. And all these are feeding into forms of growth. That's what drives business ultimately. And the distinctive thing about media agencies, particularly my silo, is that we allocate and optimize all media across all borders, sectors, media. And that's a unique vantage point. Risk management is systematic to what we do. We've had Cambridge Analytica, we've had brand safety, viewability problems, GDPR latterly. But we are the only actors who see every seller of every inventory, every seller of data, every slice, every part of the buy side, and every ad tech stack. Now, having said that, there's the old adage about the customer not wanting a quarter-inch drill, but wanting a quarter-inch hole. Clients don't want a full-service agency, they want full service. And there are more places they can get it from these days. No divine right. And we know that what they certainly don't want to do is coordinate uncoordinated agencies. So I think the biggest challenges for us lie within our structures rather than without. Now, communication, as we all know, has become far more elective than ever before. So understanding the audience, which is the core competence of media planning, is getting harder all the time. We have the client knowledge, we have the scale in media, we have access to the data. and a wider set of data than anybody else. So we know what works and what doesn't work across all media. This is not just about digital. So I think the question is whether we have the capacity to adapt. So whether we have lost the proven capacity to adapt of the last many decades. And the proof of that, I think, is right here, in fact, barely half a mile from here, which is the health of the agencies in the UK market. Potentially it is the most digitized Western market, potentially the most disintermediated market, and yet all the agency groups have thrived in the UK. So how do you explain that? I think they have thrived in the US too, if you strip away cyclical things, and we're somewhat overexposed to certain sectors which have had a hard time. But if you allow for that, I think our US performance, the agency sector generally, has been pretty good. So I think what advertisers want is better integration, not better silos. That's the road our sector is already on. We've always been on it, and we have a positive vision for the future. That vision is more about simplifying than it is about surgery. Underpinning all this is transparency and trust. I'm not aware of any agency holding company having been dragged before a regulator like several other sectors I could think of. I think that last year,
Yes.
well, I think the auditing world, I think every year is a record year for fines for them. And Carillion is a story to watch, although I think that's KPMG rather than one of our head-on competitors. So I think the media agencies and clients can find that common area of trust, and that we are finding it, and that will be the way forward. Thank you.
Ian, is there anything you want to respond to that? Because it was interesting that... Ian, is there anything you want to respond to that? Because I thought it was interesting that Adam brought up the trust and transparency issues, and I wondered whether you thought they were driving any of those external forces that may be undermining agencies.
Well, I think one thing that's quite interesting is if you, and it depends which set of numbers that you look at and who you listen to and so forth. But if you take, for example, digital, you take figures from somebody like Ubiquity, who will say that for every pound, every dollar that is spent on digital, digital video, around 5 to 7 cents will actually be seen by a human in a brand safe environment. That's the amount of money that will flow down in terms of buying ads, where essentially people will see them, and you can be sure that your video is not going to be next to ISIS, drugs, whatever, okay, in terms of that. Now, the argument for saying that if 93 to 95% of a client's money has been effectively wasted, then the people who are spending that, I think any industry, even finance, there'd be significant questions as to whether the intermediaries are actually doing a very good job using clients' money. And digital is not something that has suddenly appeared from nowhere. This has been 6, 7, 8, 9 years. We were all promised about digital would offer transparency in turn of return on investment. That was the great argument for it. Hasn't occurred. These problems in terms of that we're seeing at the moment in terms of brand safety, in terms of advertisers' money going away, they're still the same as they were years and years ago. And so I think, one argument would be to say that for the agencies to turn around and say, that we're all about trust and we're all about getting the best deal for our clients, it's hard to say that if effectively 95% of your clients' money is being wasted, that agencies are getting the best deal for their clients.
Okay, Adam, you're 7-4 ahead at the moment.
Okay, well,
obviously a lot of people sitting on their hands at the moment.
Yeah.
We'll get them off their hands shortly.
I think Ian's there's a lump of Labour fallacy, which you'll be aware of, being a keen student of politics. And I think there is also a lump of digital fallacy. That somehow, the problem I have with the IAB is that it reports a headline figure which has practically no meaning to large advertisers or to small publishers.
The headline figure being what? The amount of money that's going into digital?
Yeah, and the growth rate.
Yeah.
So let's say that a good 60% of online is is small and medium businesses, which has nothing to do with us. You've got another 10%, maybe something bought direct by web endemics that have always bought direct. So the agency world is probably handling about 30%, I'd say. Now, as far as I can gather, our clients will lose about 20% in so-called non-working media. That is analytics and verification of some sort. But we're accountable for that. We deal with every third-party verifier. We have our own data as well in M-Platform and Xaxis. So we're in a good position to tell them who are the reliable partners and who are not. So the alternative to, you can buy a double kick as convenient and certainly, but it's not flawless. And a vendor is almost certainly going to tell you that you should be spending more money with that vendor. We, on the other hand, will challenge assertions made by these platforms. So I don't, to use a politician's thing, I don't recognize 95% loss rate, but I think the agencies are probably the best equipped to tell you how much of your money is wasted, and we can do something about it.
So it's an interesting point, sort of when you mentioned Xaxis, that Xaxis, notoriety or whichever word you want to use. The whole idea that for a number of clients that they're told they can't question the margin that Xaxis makes, all that they're told is that you will have digital media at a good price, sort of as long as you don't question what that price is, nor indeed what margin Xaxis makes. Do you think that's an appropriate model for an agency group to be actually using with advertisers?
Well, when I started in the business, I remember one of the benefits, long before the internet, was that a media owner with distressed space, if they picked their partners carefully, they didn't have to broadcast the fact they had a load of cheap space to fill. So there's always been this element of a sort of grey market in media to the client's benefit. With Xaxis, from the get-go, it's been an opted-in service. Nobody's compelled to take it. I speak to our various agencies, and they regard it as Xaxis as being another potential supplier, and they're under no obligation to use it. So the client, it's entirely their choice to use it or not. And the figures I've most recently seen are that Xaxis, which will increase, it's all brand safe content for a start, and generally it will get you 30% more for your money in terms of value of exposure or return on investment. You can take it or leave it. Just like, in housing, you could, fine, we're cool with that. I see clients returning, or the client list to Xaxis is growing. If I was a client, I would have no problems with using it, if it was a competitive source. Whether it's an appropriate model, that's the client's decision.
Okay. Ian, you're ahead at the moment.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Right.
Well done,
Let me ask you a slightly more challenging question then. You said the agency model, as it currently stands at the moment, you don't expect to see it there in 3 or 4 years' time. But what will replace it then?
Well, I think it wasn't 3 to 4 years' time. I think if you look more, let's say, on a 10-year view, sort of the argument would go that, again, comes back to these points, the agencies are creatures sort of the past, the way that the current agency groups are. And in effect, what's happened is that if you look at the big holding companies, the thing that has really sort of held them up has been their media buying and planning businesses. The rest of it, if you look at it, a sort of mixture of sort of profitability, sort of, and a mixture of sort of problems. What will replace it? I think it's not. I don't think there will necessarily be one uniform set of groups that will come in. What's likely to happen, though, is that certain parts will be taken out, sort of by certain units. So if you look, for example, at what Accenture's doing, which admittedly, in terms of launching their programmatic business, there are big questions over conflict of interest, in terms of sort of acting, buying, and also acting for clients in other ways. But it shows you where
as an auditor as well.
As an auditor, well, Accenture doesn't have an audit. Yeah, Accenture doesn't have an auditor down, but you can see there that these groups which have immense firepower, that's the direction that they want to go in. So you then look at the sort of digital media buying side and you say, okay, there are entities which are coming into there. You look at things like e-commerce, the argument would be, is it that essentially IT companies have more skill sets than agency groups would in terms of the people that they've employed? If you look at creative typically has had very low barriers to entry anyway, because somebody can just actually go off and start their own business. So sort of in terms of what we replace it, there will be a place for the agencies, there's no doubt about that, but it'll be a more competitive space. And so one final point I would make on that is, look at the digital media buying space. It used to be the case that if it was TV, if you wanted to you were Procter & Gamble, want to buy TV, you went through one of the main agency media buying groups, your WPPs, your publicists and so forth. If you look at digital, you've now got a vast swathe of players in that market. You've got exchanges that you run by people like Google, you've got demand-side platforms, supply-side platforms, you've got a whole variety of space. Now, you've still got the agencies in there, but instead of actually being the gatekeepers between Procter & Gamble and Coronation Street, and there have only been 4 or 5 big agency groups there and scale counting, that sort of gatekeeper effect has been, I wouldn't say it's been completely washed away, but it's been sort of significantly reduced in the digital world.
Adam.
Well, I think digital transformation is essentially an incremental business, which we will compete for with the consultancy groups, and that's fine. We're absolutely fine with that. The agency group or the consultancy group seem to be very keen to project. Just today, it was reported from Cannes that they are not project businesses now; they are continuous account businesses. And yet, when I look on Accenture's blog, these people that's their culture. It's project-driven. People compete to be on their projects, and that's fine. We approach it from a different angle, which is a continuous, holistic view of how you build a customer relationship. Now, to say the model will disappear in 5 or 10 years, I mean, you couldn't have predicted 5 or 10 years ago that we would own Triad, for instance, which is builds more retail digital media space than all the other specialists combined. And we have Motion Content, which is a rights and contents business, and Finecast, which is the only coordinated addressable TV option in the UK, independently of AdSmart. So I think this is we are approaching the future from 2 different directions. I think ours is a holistic one, which is we shed the bits we don't need, we acquire or build the ones we do, versus a project one, which is coming in from the top via the C-suite. And I think they're complementary. I think we can compete on that footing.
Okay. Ian, I mean, you've been quite dismissive about the other C word, creativity. You've said effectively that creative agencies aren't really worth anything. Yet, we're the counterpoint to the world's biggest creative festival down in Cannes at the moment. A lot of people go to that. Isn't creativity, in whatever form you choose to define it, the thing that will actually separate out the winners from the losers? And so why are you being so dismissive of creativity?
I wouldn't be totally dismissive of creativity. I think the point was, but from an agency model standpoint, the problem has always been for the agencies that create creative agencies, very low barriers to entry. People can come in and at quite short notice. I think though it's, again, come back to your point about Cannes and you look at what's going on at the moment this week in Cannes. If you take 10, 15 years ago and you look who was involved in Cannes, it was the big agency groups, and then you'd have the clients who would come down. If you actually look at who is in Cannes now, increasingly it is the Accentures, it is the Deloittes, it is also as well the Facebooks and the Googles and so forth. Now, admittedly, if you're an Accenture, yes, you have been buying a couple of creative agencies. But that's not really your key strength. Your key strength will all be about data, be about targeting the customer, it'd be essentially what you can actually do for the client in terms of digital. The creative part of it, for a lot of clients at the moment, if you actually sort of look at it, yes, yeah, it is nice. Yeah, obviously people still run ads, and ads still have an impact. But sort of, I remember sort of the Cadbury, I think it was the Cadbury Gorilla.
Yeah.
Yeah, and everyone raved about the Cadbury Gorilla and said, isn't this a fantastic ad, and, absolutely superb and whatsoever. Absolutely had no noticeable effect on Cadbury sales, whatsoever. Yeah, in terms of the data. And I think that's, the point being is that creative, I think, is something that the agencies have to have, because it's very much, as it were, as the sort of core of the business. And obviously, if you get a great creative ad, then it can create buzz. But I think what many people are sort of coming to is, if you get something that goes digital and goes viral, that has a lot more of an impact than an ad that's maybe seen on TV and people go, oh, that's quite a nice ad.
I mean, Ian has raised the kind of what I would call the brand fame and the positive wastage question. So when digital is very targeted, but it never reaches outside of its target audiences. A counterpoint might be that actually great creative is all about creating brand fame, and therefore wastage, which you get in a non-digital environment, is actually a positive thing. Would you?
Well, I think
not like putting words in your mouth.
you've horses for courses. There is a need for higher frequency digital, more personalised, and we know how to get hold of that. And we have creative directors now inside our media agencies. We tend to outsource quite a bit of this, and we're completely agnostic about whether a creative agency, one of ours, or we outsource it. But I think that something I find, it's not just the consultancies, but it's among the analyst community too, is a tendency to think everything can be reduced to algorithms and mechanistic patterns, the pursuit of the loyal customer, which doesn't exist as we know. Most advertising works by appealing to a large base and marginal sales. Now, we know that because ThinkBox tells us that the largest TV advertising category in the UK is now the web endemics. And every web endemic that's on TV is a household name, as far as I can tell. And I remember talking to somebody at Facebook who was telling me about brands which only use Facebook, and I hadn't heard of any of them. There are a lot of new entrants in. The barriers have come down, moats have dried up, so there's a lot of new entrants at the bottom of the e-commerce pool. But how do you grow? You're going to hit a ceiling sooner or later, and that's when you need to buy fame, probably outside digital reach.
I was going to say, because Ian, despite your negativity on trad models and things like that, you're actually very positive on ITV.
Yeah.
So how do you explain that paradox?
Well, if I can just come back to that point about the sort of internet companies being very quickly, and then I'll come back to TV. I mean, what's very interesting, if you look at the internet companies, absolutely right. Sort of they do advertise on TV quite a lot. But it all seems to be about not necessarily the quality of the ad, it's just reminding people sort of who they are. I mean, the greatest example, one of the best examples I guess you can say with that is Go Compare. The opera single, nobody's claiming that the Giro Compario is the greatest ad that's ever been produced, nor indeed that there was a huge amount of skill that went into that. But the simple fact is that when it was taken off the screen, what you found was that website traffic plummeted on that. Now, the important thing there was that sort of in people's minds, all they had associated with was the buffoon opera singer character with this particular website. It didn't actually need a lot of skill. All it needed to be was actually that website was associated in the public's mind with that particular character. And so you could argue, yes, that proves that actually brands work. And coming on to the TV point, it definitely proves that TV has a big reach. But there's not a huge amount of skill that's actually required for that, and it probably doesn't need a huge creative budget. I think in terms of TV, I think the sort of the point that we'd have there and why I'm so positive on this is, with no disrespect meant to anyone in this room, it's very, very easy to sort of look at ourselves and think that our media habits sort of are the same as everyone else in the country. And the simple fact is, and I'm not going to take a poll now, but my guess would be that there are not many people in this room who watch Coronation Street or Emmerdale. Yet the simple fact is, though, if you look at the country, 7 to 8 million people plus, 6 times a week, watch both programmes. Okay? You take Game of Thrones, which everyone always, you get a lot of talk about, everyone's watching Game of Thrones. Even in the finale, even with catch-up, it actually had the reach of, can you teach my pet to do that? Which is a good program. But, you know, when we're talking about sort of mass audience, quite frankly, it doesn't really cut the mustard. So I think one of the sort of issues here, and again, it's an argument that you could say in terms of against the agency groups. You've got media buyers who are telling their clients, you've got to actually spend on digital, sort of neglect TV. It's all about actually sort of going after the millennials. It's all about actually getting your ads on YouTube and so forth. And what's been happening, quite frankly, they don't really know how most people in the country actually spend their time watching media. You ask a media buyer how much they think is spent on video on demand, they'll tell you around 25% of viewing. The actual figure is 4%. You ask them how much they think an average person spends watching live TV, they'll say around less than 1.5 hours. The figure is actually 3 hours 15. You've got an industry there that actually doesn't know what the representative base is actually doing. Now, I know sort of finance is not exactly the best industry out there, but I'd like to think that we at least have a better idea as to actually what our clients want and what they're actually doing than actually something like that.
Well, Ian, I think the one area where this room and the country is aligned is in Love Island, actually, probably, which I know you're a big fan of, aren't you? Yeah.
Great.
Adam, so you're completely out of touch with what the real people in the country think, not the Shoreditch crowd or whatever.
Well, I mean, we have subscription to Barb. I don't think anybody in the city does. So I think we've got a rough idea of what TV hours are and shares between channels and so on. I think that fundamentally, what's wrong with Go Compare as well? What's wrong with reminding people? Now, I remember going into a petrol station about 8 or 9 years ago, and there was just a sign up which said no meerkats. And I mean, so that was achieved by advertising. Talk about zeitgeist. I mean, what could that... Anyway, brand building is something which takes place in the head. It's not something which we command. It's the fusion of all kinds of signals across many, many inputs, and often the product of something short of rationality on the part of the audience. So we have to command. The market has forced us into these disparate disciplines, I think, to try and harness this. And I said earlier that attention was becoming more elective, and people are fussier about whether advertising is a use or an ornament now. So I think creativity is absolutely key to this, to make advertising useful and welcome in their lives. So that's what we're determined to do. And I don't think you're going to do that with an algorithm.
Right. Okay, let me open it up to the audience. You've got two heavyweight punchers here slugging it out. Does anybody want to chip in with a question? Yeah, okay. Why don't you have the mic, and then you can, everybody at the back here as well. Give it back to me.
Prash from Resonance. Look, I think based on everything I've heard, I don't think all brands can reach their audiences directly. They're going to need somebody in between to help them. So there is a space there, and whether it's the current form of agency or future form. I guess the question is, as the market evolves and you have new entrants, do the current big groups, what do they have that they can use to keep the new entrants like the Accentures at bay? And basically, because if they can't keep them at bay, they'll get swallowed up and they'll just shrink massively. But if they can keep them at bay, then they can remain as they are. What do you think about that?
That's one for you. Why? You've got a mic. Why are you different and why are you better than Accenture or their peers?
I think it's just because we're simply more diverse than they are. And to give you an example, a certain large digital vendor, I have a little bit he's now discouraging clients from taking stuff in-house because they've been doing that. Things have been going wrong. Instead of clients have been putting their investment, which is not what this particular seller wants. So they want us as a shop. We have the skills, we can take the risks, but the clients probably don't want to. And we have this, I don't think the consultancies, if they are our enemy, have the slightest interest in getting into brand consulting or public relations or direct marketing. They don't want to employ armies of people. I think they are project focused, and that fits very well with the idea of IT becoming more consumer facing. But I think they're sort of hit and run merchants. They're not there for the long term.
Ian. So Adam says Accenture, its weakness is that it's not diverse. Is that going to last? Is that a long-standing state of affairs, or will they evolve and adapt as they go along?
Well, so I think, Adam, you're a historian as well, aren't you? Do you do history or not? I can't remember.
History?
Yeah.
At gunpoint.
At gunpoint. Fair enough. I did history. I mean, what you tend to see in history is that sort of when people look at things and they say, you know, there's a sudden change. Actually, sudden changes are extremely rare in history. What tends to happen is there's an evolution that comes through, and sort of you look at sort of how people view the 60s. Actually, very, very little changed of what we would think of the 60s. Most of the changes actually occurred in the 70s. The point I'm trying to make is that sort of for the consultancies, they will adapt. No one's expecting within a year, 2 years' time for the consultancies to suddenly have all the skills that the agency groups have. But the big advantage that the consultancies have, and indeed anyone else who is looking to come into their space, is they can cherry pick exactly what are the most attractive parts and which are not. PR, I'd argue, the consultancies are not interesting because, quite frankly, they don't see it as that attractive. Margins aren't particularly great. Yeah, in terms of longer-term trends for the industry, yeah, they're so-so. Where they are interested in, you can see that by their recent moves, is media buying and planning. Extremely high margin. There's a reason why, if you were to take the agencies and you were to look at their results they report to people like me, they never split out the profitability of their media units. It's always bundled in with the creative side of things. And that is where they have identified is really where the real money lies. And the problem, therefore, becomes for the agencies is that essentially you look at where these new competitors are coming into, they're targeting specifically the most profitable part of the agency groups. And that part of the agency groups help to actually, as it were, maybe sort of subsidize is maybe too strong a word, but it's definitely helped fuel a lot of the agency's growth in the past. And the question becomes now is that in future years, if everything else in terms of creative and PR isn't going so great, and media starts to actually grow more slowly, what does that mean for the agency model? The risk is essentially that growth potential is permanently derated.
Adam, your diversity is obviously a weakness. It allows you to be cherry-picked, but you would say it was a strength, presumably?
Well, of course it's a strength. And it's been continually evolved over time. I mean, when I started in the industry, I knew roughly what everybody in the building did. Now, I haven't got a clue what the hell they're doing. I'm in Red Lion Square, and the place is full of data scientists. And you know, Ian's frustration as an analyst is that we don't publish very detailed, nobody does, and very detailed breakdowns of our profits, and why should we? But it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody to know that even in the media silo, the profitability profile varies between whether we're making content or buying TV or running a digital campaign. And one of the surprising things about digital is how many people there are involved. Now, I was chatting to one of our really good guys at MediaCom the other day, and he was talking about the difficulty of clients hiring what he called optimizers. And I assumed he meant some sort of machine, but no, he meant a person. And digital is full of bodies. And one of the reasons I think clients might be reluctant to take this stuff in-house is because lots of bodies don't generally sit with very large profit margins.
So it's expensive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, any more from the floor? Yeah, one over there. How can we get a mic to you? I don't know. Let's try this. Just say who you are, where you're from.
Should be a... Jim from Publicis. So, as I said earlier, I've got the week off. And I think that actually helps sort of contribute to this. Yes, I'm sorry you're not in Cannes and on the Crozet at the moment. They're just starting. Yeah. But I think actually the prosecution just sort of gave the game away just then, because it was talking about cherry picking. And I think, okay, I've got a vested interest because I work for an agency group, But all of us come to work thinking about the consumer and the whole journey of that. And yes, there may be people within the organisation who are looking at how to optimise profits because they have to do it for the city, but we do have a holistic view. And I think what's happening with the new entrants, they're just seeing our business as a way to cherry pick the bits which can generate them the most additional revenues and not be their core business, but just a nice profitable end of it. And on top of that, who is going to be, we have huge competition between ourselves, which keeps us honest, whether that's making sure that we're getting the best deals from the big tech players, because do we really think the management consultants are going to be honest in dealing with them and doing good trading deals? No, I think I would have the competition amongst the agencies who know that they are always going to be on the rack if there's anything wrong here. So I think a mixture of the competition between the agencies, our ability to evolve, and like I say, we're not at Cannes because we're developing an artificial intelligence system which is going to improve the way we work. Who would have thought of that a year ago? But because we're small and we're evolved. And then you've got the other issue about why do people want our business now? What are their real motives?
Okay, Ian, so their cherry picking is ultimately going to rebound on them because they will be seen to be profiteering.
Always a possibility. I think one thing sort of, though, I would say, and actually sort of hasn't really come up at all in this, but it's again a sort of another reason why it could be argued there should be concern for the agencies, particularly in the media buying space. We talked a lot about digital, and effectively, the digital media buying space has become a lot more complex and competitive. The traditional media space has typically been, in media buying, has been ruled by an oligopoly. If you look at what some of the TV broadcasters are now doing in Europe, particularly if you look at someone like an RTL, they are definitely, maybe slowly, but they are definitely looking at ways to actually bring programmatic in to trade their inventory to go direct to clients. And they are looking to get other broadcasters into that partnership. And indeed, one of the very interesting things from our perspective, from a city standpoint, was going back to ITV. Going into the trading update of ITV, everyone was sort of, from a city standpoint, everyone was negative because they said, well, we speak to the media buyers and they tell us that June, no one's spending around the World Cup. It's only around 5% ad growth for ITV. And then ITV comes out with the trading update and reports something like 17% for June. And then when you speak with ITV, sort of, and put to the case, well, how is there such this disconnect between the two sides? A point, well, are you actually trading more directly with clients and bypassing the media buyers? They sort of bypass the question. And I think, the risk here, there is always, if you look at the sort of internet generally, the business model that the internet has killed or severely disrupted is the intermediary. It's the intermediary who has made a nice margin and has made that nice margin because they actually act as the gatekeeper. And when you get technology, certainly one of the lessons you've seen in media over the past 15 years, is that when you get technology coming through, those sorts of business models are extremely vulnerable. So, it's absolutely right. Some clients could say, agencies, you've already seen the furore over Accenture. People are saying there's a conflict of interest. But also as well, what I would say is, this is not just an Accenture thing so that the consultancy is trying to eat the agency's business. You've now got some of the platforms themselves saying, well, hold on a minute, do we need the media agencies? Can we just go direct to clients? If we've got technology there, can we actually just, why do we actually need to have a pay away to the agency group?
Okay, I think we are, I don't know if it's my mic or not, but anyway, we're coming towards the end of our time, and Adam, you are one down, so I think we need to kind of wrap it up.
Okay, I'll be quite quick.
So the final word for the defence.
Clients buying their own TV. I used to be a TV buyer, and David Ogilvy once said that, agencies or clients don't hire people like us, and they would never dream of hiring people like us. And if you met the TV buyers, you'd probably want to agree with him if you were a client. So the as for being the gatekeeper, well, I can't think of bigger gatekeepers than Google or Facebook. And who in this world has done most to protect advertisers' interests against their, disposition? The agencies. That we have led the fight on viewability and safety and value.
Yeah. Okay, so you are standing up for all the good things here. What is the score? Goodness me! I can't believe there's no manipulation. Adam. Right, okay. 1818. I think. Okay, I'll go mad if I start looking at that screen all the time. I need a VAR headphone. Don't know. Yeah. Foul there. Penalty. Whatever. Okay, I think we're probably. I'm sure our protagonists are calling out for a drink, but I think that was fantastic, and we are 1818, and I think that is a really great note. Whatever. Somebody's fiddling with it here. You can only vote what? Or does it say vote early, vote often, basically. Feels like a Russian election booth here, actually, doesn't it?
The margin isn't big enough.
But I think that was fantastic. I really loved these two guys giving it their all and going at it with kind of integrity and honesty and humour as well, and openness. And I think it's a wonderful way to end NFI Cannes 2018. We'll be back again, I'm sure, next year. But ladies and gentlemen, before you head to the bar, would you give the Mighty Marauder and the City Crack Shooter, I got it right, Crack Shooter, whatever it is, a big hand.
Thank you very much.